Massive, especially when the clocks tick down. The players at some point will reach that climax of the game when it's really messy, when the tactics are flying, and there it's just pure instinct. So 2 seconds disappears instantly. We even saw Wesley So you lose on time yesterday. That's how quickly the increment can disappear. And both of these players, known for their speed, they don't really want to get down to those time scrambles. And usually it's just about who's in the better shape, who's in better form. Here we go, though. It is the Petrov defense, one that I name-dropped earlier, showing how much Jan Nepomniachtchi wants to win this game. He's taking it seriously this tournament, the Chessable Masters. He wants to win it. We see a trade of pawns in the center. This is still the main line of the Petrov defense. Until now, not the most common move. White bringing out a bishop, blocking the d-pawn. But this d-pawn will later most likely move. Often White pushes a pawn forward, drops the bishop back, and then the d-pawn is free. So clearly preparation, a bit of a battle here. We see on the left side of our boards the percentages of the kind of outcome of this opening. White tends to win 47% of the time. That's a huge score, I've got to say. But Jan Nepomniachtchi, he's got more time in the tank. Robert, what do you make of these early moves, these early decisions?
I'm honestly most surprised by Maxime Vachiligrov's time usage. He's one of the quickest players on the planet, as is Jan Nepomniachtchi, and we are seeing a pawn sacrifice in the moment. So White is about to take twice, goes up a pawn. Black gets a pair of bishops on an open board, so that is compensating for the material deficit. But as I look just at the clock, Jan Nepomniachtchi, in his preparation, it was Maxime who played an offbeat opening, and Tanya, are you as surprised as I am to see that it's Maxime playing something of a sideline, and yet he's the one using his clock?
Definitely. And Robert, we've spoken so much about preparation, and this is something that has to be Jan Nepomniachtchi's World Championship prep. But for Maxime, he's still in the think with that last move. So I'm just trying to understand. There are so many natural developing moves here. You can take the knight out to c3. You could double up on the e line, attacking the bishop. What goes on in a grandmaster's mind at this early stage when obvious moves are in front of you to slow down? What is Maxime thinking about here, David?
Maxime, he's the most instinctive player I've ever met. I've played him since we were both 8 years old, and normally in a position like this, he would kind of throw the moves down on the board. They'd be flying out, pawn to d3, like you said, bring the bishop out, bring the knight out. He won't stop to calculate until it's really necessary, but he knows he's walked into some opening preparation here, and hence his last move, he's trying to simplify the equation. That is not Jan Nepomniachtchi, I can confirm. That is Wesley So on the camera, unless something magic has happened. But yeah, he's just trying to get rid of a set of pawns, trying to simplify the equation since he is one pawn ahead. But Robert's right. The time usage is really mysterious. I have actually seen Jan Nepomniachtchi employ this pawn sacrifice in the past. It is known. So Maxime may be surprised by the employment of the Petrov defense. Maybe just didn't spend too much time preparing, wanting to stay fresh instead. Either way, he's getting out of the opening, and once White recaptures, Black also has an issue how to develop these pieces. If the Black bishops start playing, then I do fear for White, despite the extra pawn. So, Robert, how would you evaluate the practical chances of this gambit, the sacrifice?
Well, this last decision to offer a trade of queens, I think, is a good practical one from Maxime Vachiligov. We often tell our newer members of the audience, our students, to trade pieces when you're ahead. White is a pawn up, so if the queens could come off the board, and also if the rooks later leave, then that extra pawn will make its presence felt. It is a c2 pawn, but later you can use it as a pass pawn, push it forward. So the bishops, they are long-range pieces. They can poke and prod on both flanks. That's the good news. The bad news for Jan is he is down a pawn, and I don't see the clear-cut compensation. I don't see something he can target. He is now playing defense a bit. He's going to prevent White from pushing those pawns forward, and the queen trade has happened. You see the evaluation bar slightly inching upwards for White. I would agree with that assessment. I would certainly love to have this. It's a dream position for Maxime.
Yeah. He's got the extra pawn, and David, sorry, but I was just going to say, pieces traded off, queens traded off, he's got the extra pawn, the bishop's coming out. It just looks like Jan's going to be fighting it out for a draw here. It feels like a game for 2 results to me.
I was about to kind of preach about how you should trade on your terms, not your opponent's terms. I was really surprised to see Jan Nepomniachtchi take off that queen in the center a few moves ago, because now White's knight is really well solidified. Look at this. It looks like a granite statue in the middle of the board, protected by this pawn, protected by the bishop. It's on a square we call an outpost, and the only way to get rid of it effectively is to trade off these knights. But now if White does take the black knight, the black pawns will be shattered. I'm expecting that to happen any moment now. What else? Simply for white, the compensation here for black will lie in this bishop being a bit of a nasty pest here along the diagonal, just reminding the white pawns on the queen side that they're slightly vulnerable. And this bishop, if it can get into the game, if there is a trade of knights, for example, via this diagonal, then the bishops do start to play a role. So still not over, but I agree with both of you. At the very minimum, white should be able to return a pawn and kind of bail out into a draw. So it's very much a two-result type of position where it's white trying to make things happen, trying to cling on, trying to profit from the extra material, but essentially black objectively should be fine. This is really reminiscent of the Marshall Gambit and other e4, e5 openings that some of our viewers might know, where black gives up a pawn but has long-term position. And watch out for the b file to become a bit of a pressure point in the near future. But for now, these two weaknesses do give black the questions to answer. White's knight is coming. Small advantage. I think we're all in agreement here for white.
This is the first time for everything, right? We're all agreeing white is better. It's a safe position. The knight, as you mentioned, can venture to b3 and c5 or up to e4 into the center. And unfortunately for Jan, he has his own weaknesses to worry about. A pawn's best friend is another pawn. David, you know I like to do this. If you can just grab that c6 pawn and scoot it over to b6 for a second, well, that looks like a much more stable foundation where your pawns are connected. But with the pawns separated the way they are, that means that white can start attacking them. In fact, the a7 pawn already means that the black rook is tethered to it. You can't easily move that into the position because a7 will drop. So the bishops are out. Tanya, we all seem to be on the same page here, but I guess the question becomes, how challenging will it be for Jan to prove that he can obtain that half point?
Yeah, that's the big question here. Jan will be on the defense. He's got the bishop pair and the open B line and the rook on the D file, also on the open file as compensation. So there's definitely piece activity. But at the end of it, Maxime up upon the knight having these good squares. I think Maxime's going to try to get as much as he can from this position. We'll try to grind it out. This is a good moment to jump back to our other high-stakes game, which we haven't had a look at, as Wesley So takes on Alireza Firouzja. One of these two players will be eliminated. Should we check in with our other two heavy hitters?
Let's do just that, Tanya, as we see Alireza Firouzja starting with the white pieces against Wesley So. And I was going to say Wesley So solid, because this is rock solid for black. No weaknesses at all. It's what we call the Carlsbad pawn structure. Whenever we see a pawns on e3 and d4 faced off by pawns on c6 and d5. But with a twist this time, because white has already advanced a pawn to f4. Pros and cons here, you have more central control, but a bit of a backward pawn now. The backward pawn on e3 is a bit tender. You'll be stuck defending it for a long time. I've got to say, I'm surprised the evaluation bar is kind of slightly in white's favor here, unless it's because of this move, opening up the center. I would have thought black is doing completely fine, but suddenly questions to answer. The black queen is hit. This is very dynamic now. Up for Firouzja's alley. We were talking about who wants their style of position of game, and white is suffering long term. White has a weak isolated queen's pawn. This f4 pawn very tender as well. But for now, this queen hit. The f6 pawn a bit of a target as well. Robert, you're great with these tactics. Do you see any trouble here for Wesley So? Is if he just retreats his queen, for example, is he still as solid as it looks at first glance?
Well, white is going to start throwing pieces forward, especially if that queen goes to c7 away from the black king. I think f5 is the next move that Alireza wants to uncork. Let's open up that diagonal for the queen to land on h6. Let's go for tactics in front of the black king. So for Wesley, the long term is great for him. White has this isolated pawn that is blockaded. If the queens disappeared, white is in some danger in the long run. The endgame would be one that Capablanca could only dream of. May he rest in peace. So as I look at this position, I think it actually plays to both of these player styles. In the immediate position, white can go on the prowl, go for the black king. But if you stall, if you hesitate for even a moment, and black is able to further consolidate and solidify the position, there are some long-term weaknesses. So f5 is on the board, Tanya. I think that it's a battle of styles here, and both players are doing the right thing.
I completely agree with everything that you've just said, but I do like white's position, especially after that move f5. And to complete your thought, if we just back up before knight to d5 was played, David, as black, you really want to keep things close and you want to keep your king side solid. But I think the tactics that you were pointing out earlier, if black does make the move like g5, they're already on the board. Because after g5, white can go knight takes f6, pick up that pawn on f6, and suddenly queen takes g5. Once you recapture, the f6 knight falls and the whole king side falls apart. So there's really no way for Wesley to keep the king side blocked, which means that the white bishop on d3 and the pawn on f5 can open up after a trade on the live board. And I see the g6 pawn indeed has been traded off. I think this position suits Alireza's style just a little bit more than it suits Wesley.
I think David might be muted right now. As we could see him chatting, but nothing said. David, you back with us?
Excited about the position. I was just saying that this position, I like it for white as well. I'm on Tanya's side. It looks very attractive for Firouzja, but he has to keep pedaling. It's like riding a bicycle. If you stop, you might fall off. And long term, because he is worse here, he is kind of suffering with this backward D pawn, this isolated pawn. Long term, chances aren't great. He has to play it for the attack. So key moment, he's stopped, he's thinking. He's actually quite significantly down on the clock, but moves like queen to h6 strike out look really, really attractive. At some point, you might consider throwing a battering ram down the board with your h-pawn. If Wesley's able to trade off pieces, Wesley will be loving life. Watch out for Wesley, for example, bring the black queen forward and offering that trade. So very much in the balance as we see this real clash of styles. Both players playing true to their character here. Really fascinating to watch.
Yeah. And I think it's the kind of position where if the pieces get traded off, like you're pointing out with queen to f4, these long-term weaknesses that white has, the isolated queen spawn on d4, these will come into play and give Wesley chances to perhaps fight for more. So for Alireza, it's really key to try to make most of the initiative on the king side. I love the idea of putting the queen on h6. Robert, how can actually Alireza try to keep the queens on the board? Because now that I see queen h6, queen f4 actually forces a queen trade.
And that is certainly not what Alireza wants. So he's trying to make this checkmate happen, but you can't will it into existence. And that's the problem, especially for newer players who love to try to deliver a checkmate. You think, I'm going after the opponent's king, I'm going to checkmate them, and then they just trade the queens off. Ooh. And you feel a little bit lost, like you don't have any chess left in you. And so for Alireza, here comes the queen trade. He's strong enough where, of course, he doesn't feel at a loss. He is great in the endgame as well. But as I look at the clocks and I look at the position, I have to say, advantage Wesley So. He has been able to stave off that first wave of attack. He's in good shape. And with the pieces coming off, I really don't see the problem for black anymore.
Looks great for black, I've got to say. I'm going to revise my opinion just from one move ago, or two moves ago now that the queens have left. The only solace for white is that you have access to this d6 square. The white knight does jump in. So the trade of the queens, long term, again, great for black. But short term, white is hitting this pawn. White is trying to cause some nuisance, now infiltrating potentially on the 7th rank. Will the rook jump in? Again, you have to play actively. You have to play dynamically to keep the momentum before you fall off that bike. And in the meantime, threats. Black threatening to take this knight, maybe threatening to take this pawn as a deflection. But yeah, Firouzja playing energetically as predicted, hitting this knight. Evaluation bar stubbornly in the middle. Who's, just before we switch back to the other game, whose position do we feel is easier to play now that the queens are off?
I would say white's activity now is speaking to me, but black's position is better. But on the other board, we see a rook trade on offer between Maxime Vachier-Lagrave and Jan Nepomniachtchi on the left. And this is a critical moment in that game, because if Jan trades rooks, he better have calculated 15 moves ahead, as his pawn structure is weaker. So this is one of these endgames on the left-hand side of our screen here that we do not take for granted. It is pure calculation if you're Jan Nepomniachtchi. That's why he's invested already over 30 seconds. I could see him thinking for another minute.
But even if you don't trade rooks in this position, you've still got to be careful, right? Because white's king can try and march over to d4. It just feels like black's pawn structure is so terrible on that left side of our screen right now. So if anyone's trying to push this, it's got to be Maxime. But David, realistically, what are the chances with the rook on the board, given black's weaknesses? Is there real metal to try in this position?
Unfortunately, I think that chances are minimal. He's playing a great defender in Jan Nepomniachtchi, someone who'll defend actively. I really like Black's last move on that left board on our screens. Black's pushing the H-pawn forward, just edging towards making yet another trade. The Black King might march forward to, I think it's just too little material. It's too reduced. Your artillery here, just no real winning chances. If you were playing someone lower rated, maybe Maxime Vachier-Lagrave would get excited, but unlikely against Jan. Also, look at the clock times in that left on that left board. 2 minutes against 4. I simply don't think Vachier-Lagrave is going to be anything at all. A draw, by far the most likely result in that one, even if White is having slightly the better of it symbolically. So, yeah, we're predicting a draw on the left side of the board. In the meantime, Wesley So has frozen on the other one. The white rook has landed on e7, and suddenly the clock times have balanced out there. Robert, you mentioned that board clock slightly favored Wesley. Are you still of the same opinion after this long think? And then he makes a move.
Oh, but this is actually a huge moment on the right-hand side of our screens, because Wesley So, his rook is the only piece protecting his knight. So the white knight can put pressure on the rook. I know this may be a bit difficult for people to visualize, but on the right-hand board, the knight can attack the rook to try to kick it, but the black king will step closer to the white rook. That is what's holding on for Wesley. So he invested the time wisely, and he's worked it out. You see the evaluation bar still in the middle, but actually on the left-hand side of our screens, the evaluation bar is going up and up in Maxime Vachier-Lagrave's favor. This isn't just a drawn endgame. Maxime is pushing.
Commentator's curse. Tanya, I might have jinxed him there, Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. You were asking about winning chances. Maybe he's created some.
It looks like he's just pushed his f-pawn. That d5 weakness is forever there. Black needs to trade on g3, but I'm still thinking about the right side board that we were pointing out. The move knight b7 that you mentioned earlier, hitting that rook. We might be seeing a repetition with Black's king shuffling one step to the left and one step to the right. King f8, king g8, just pursuing White's rook on the e7, h7 square. Wesley So shaking his head there. But he's got nothing to be worried about right now. What are the chances of these guys going in for the repetition right here, right now?
The more that Firouzja is in the tank, the more his clock drops down, the more inclined he will be towards bailing out with a draw. You can escape here with White. You can force the issue and take a draw if you want. And we're seeing that motif happen on the right side of your screen. Look at this, the Black King stepping left, stepping right, hitting the White Rook. And where to go? No escape squares. A trade of rooks. And actually, that will clearly favor Black. So I think this is the time for Firouzja to bail out. Meantime, in the other board, the evaluation bar's gone through the roof. Suddenly, is White winning? Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. Is he going to win this rook endgame? Firouzja against So is indeed a draw by repetition. It's time to focus. Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. This endgame, he's working some magic. Suddenly, Nepomniachtchi leans back and realizes there's big trouble. White's c-pawn is simply going to march up the board. How to stop this simple plan of promoting the pawn?
What he missed, because as you said, the carpet has been rolled out for that c-pawn, and Black is down a pawn even though material is equal. Let that sink in. The material is even. Both sides have 2 pawns, but Black kind of has 1. And this is why double pawns are so bad. This is why your coaches tell you you want to avoid it if you can, because 1 white pawn stops 2 of Black's. David, I'm going to have you do that thing again. Pick up the f7 pawn for a second. Just hover it, or that one, yes, to e6. You can create a passed pawn. You can't do it when there are 2 pawns in a row like this, and White, on the other hand, plays c4, c5, c6, and so on, and it gets the other side.
Really nicely explained there, Robert, that essentially White has an extra pawn, it's pushing forward, and the rook on d5 is so nicely placed because it makes sure that the Black King can never actually pass through and defend that c-pawn from a queening. It's attacking the f5 pawn, it's blocking off the d-file, and it looks like Jan Nepomniachtchi is in big trouble. Easy moves for White.
Moves, and he's calculated so well here. The mathematician, Maxime Vachier-Lagrave, with that education, he is so good in these positions where it's just a race. White is marching forward. Not just that, but once the white pawn steps forward, the white rook will actually step behind to block any attempts by the black rook to give itself up. And I'm not sure if there's even any time to go and grab this white pawn. He has to try it, because what else? You have to take that pawn and hope to get the black rook back. But 2 squares away now, and it will be soon touched down. Once the pawn lands on c7, it will be unstoppable. Nepomniachtchi is shaking his head. He knows it's inevitable now. He's let it slip. What was, I think commentators curse again, I was claiming a dead drawn endgame. It's gone. 5 moves later, he's busted. That's how difficult these endgames are. I need to go back and study my rook endgames, that's for sure. Nepomniachtchi, maybe just rushing a bit. He still had a few minutes left on his clock when he made that mistake. But fair play to Vachier-Lagrave. Impressive, smooth sailing. We said it was a 2-result game. He squeezed water from a stone here.
Maxime Vachier-Lagrave felt it that there was something to fight for in that position where Jan Nepomniachtchi declined the rook trades. It looked so close to a draw, but it all comes down to this pawn structure. He managed to create the pass pawn. And like you mentioned, there's no time for black to even grab the f4 pawn. We've been talking about that rook on d5. Once the c pawn moves forward, that rook on d5 will slide one step towards the left side and block any defensive ideas on the c line as well. The king and the rook playing an impressive role in assisting the c-pawn. This is Maxime Vachier-Lagrave's game. He knows it. He leans back.
And the graph below the board tells the full story here. It was even, and I think that Jan Nepomniachtchi, he was lulled into a sense of complacency. I'll make a draw every single time I get this position. Not today, not now. And the problems were with his pawn structure. He had these split pawns, and his d5 pawn in particular was a weakness, and now it's off the board. Only white has a passer. Black's king, it's slowly marching towards the side of the board. White can even give up the rook to get a new queen, but I'm not sure if that's necessary. Like, why don't you just bring your rook to the final rank and then push your pawn after it? Just don't give black even a semblance of hope here. Queen versus rook is a win, theoretically speaking, but when you don't have much time on your clock, it can be difficult to prove. So I like keeping the rook on the board and then pushing the pawn.
Robert the Prophet again. He drops his rook back. The pawn is going to promote. Not much to do about it. The pawn will cost the black rook his life. Tanya, I think we'll see a resignation any moment now.
Yes, absolutely. I think Jan Nepomniachtchi knows it as well. The king is extremely strong on b5 and just marches forward to assist that c7 pawn. The rook on d3, making sure that the black's king can't come and defend that c8 square. Pieces are beautifully placed. And notice how black still hasn't even managed to create a pass pawn. And that is it. Jan Nepomniachtchi cannot fight the c7 pawn. He resigns. Maxime takes the win. Wow, this endgame just turned around really fast, Robert.
It did, and that's when it happens when you think that you're for sure going to make a draw. I don't blame Jan Nepomniachtchi. On a good day, he draws that game for sure, but not in this one. Maxime Vachier-Lagrave never gave up. He was ceaselessly determined to fight for the full point, and he earned it.
He earned it, and we can see the shock on Jan Nepomniachtchi. He knows that he was so close to holding